Hey there, patrons, and welcome to part two of the Matrix Mirror Effect. In the last one, we did all the tracking, and at this point, what do we have? We have a camera solve, but also we have a plane that kind of covers all of these dots. And looking back at that tutorial, by the way, I wasn't satisfied with how long it took. Like it was like a 15-minute tutorial, which in theory, not too bad. But I felt like I kind of rambled on for a lot. But maybe it was a perfect length because I already know how to do it. Maybe you don't. Either way. We've already fallen into the same trap of rambling. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. We made a plane. I think we actually used, we used shape keys for this one, and I mentioned that that's not going to matter for the rest of this, and that's going to hold true because for this part, let's focus on getting rid of these tracker markers because before we do any liquefaction, which is basically going to be distorting the texture we project onto here, I'd like to project a texture without any tracker dots because I think that would be good. So the technique for this is we are going to extract out an image sequence that is basically a bunch of bakes of this plane, so it's going to look stabilized. Then in DaVinci, we're going to get rid of the dots, and then we're going to reproject it. It sounds more complicated than it is, so here's what we do. So at this point, we just have a plane. It doesn't have a material. So let me actually enable film transparency so we can see everything in the background. Nice. Let's give this thing a material that projects the texture. A lot of people use UV project modifier for this. There's an easier way. We're just going to use an image texture. What do we want to texture this with? Well, the original footage, which by the way I renamed because I kept running into an issue. I tried to record this tutorial yesterday, but for some reason, something about this kept going wrong and I couldn't figure it out. Turns out I have multiple videos called footage and there was like cache issues or something. Either way, I renamed it. We have our footage. We want to make sure that it's not just a single frame, but it's playing the whole thing. So I'm going to enable both of these. And I'm going to make sure that it goes for, I think it was 220 frames. And I'm going to pretend like, oh, I need a check. But see, there's another glitch. I can't see the timeline. I don't know what's going on with my instance of Blender. I just want the timeline. Either way, 220 frames. So we have a video playing from the perspective of the camera. It doesn't really make much sense. It's not projecting. It's just using the wrong coordinate system. So let's use windowed coordinates. Beautiful. And you can see now, hopefully it doesn't do that popping I was talking about. No, this is fine. You can see it's projecting the video. If anything, the only weird thing about this is whenever it's out of bounds, right, it's not within the windowed coordinates, it's going to repeat. So it's actually taking texture from like the Pac-Man effect, like down here. So when you exit this, it goes right back down here. That's a thing. We can fix that by just turning this into extend, which, it still gives us nonsense, but like at least it's like stretching the very top pixel. And if we're doing some liquefaction to this mirror, it's going to look better this way. So either way, we've projected the texture. And all we need to do is extract it now. By the way, this only works from the camera if I look at it from a different view, camera view. So to extract this out, we're just going to bake it like any other texture. And if you saw the last tutorial series about the severed hand, which had a similar process but a bit different, you'll know how to do this. So we're going to go to cycles because this is the one with the baking. I'm only going to bake like with 10 samples. And we're going to be using this add-on called animated bake. Either way, it's an add-on that should come with some of the newer versions of Blender. Make sure you enable testing to see it. And you type in like bake or animated bake, and you're going to find it. If you don't have testing, it's not going to be there. It's one of my favorite add-ons. It lets you bake not just an image, but an image sequence, which kind of seems useless for texturing, but for something like this and for visual effects, it's great. So let's make a destination for our bake. I'm going to call it bake at, let's say, 1,000 pixels, which actually is overkill. Because if you think about it, how big is this plane at any point? It's not that big, but whatever, because the whole footage is 1080p. Either way, 1,000 pixels, call it bake, click OK, and let's make a directory for this. If you don't make a directory, like you don't tell it where to save to, animated bake is going to spit at an error being like, no, I'm not going to do it. So make sure you save it to a directory. I'm going to make a new folder. I'm going to call it sequence.bake. I don't know. That's where it's going to live. And it's going to be PNG sequence, okay? Just like normal baking, select the object, select the node that you want to bake to, and then we're going to bake out emission, Y, and if it seems like I'm just clicking random things, you're like, slow down, Y. We're just, again, we're projecting this footage, which is essentially, since there's no like BSDF here, it's as if we just sent this through an emission. So that's why it's a emission bake. We don't need any margin, and we can just bake as is. So only 220 frames. Click the plane, click the node, animated bake, and it's going to look like Blender freezes, but what's actually going on behind the scenes is it's really gonna throttle your computer, but it's going to output this to a folder like this one. So you can see we have bake 001, 2, 3, and a lot of these look the same, but if you watch back this image sequence, it's going to show kind of like a portal or a window into that area. It's like we've extracted everything inside the mirror plane. Do you know what I mean? We're extracting out the plane. So I'm going to let this think about it, because it's making 220,000 by 1,000 pixel PNGs. And I'll cut back to when that's done. Okay, I baked out 220 frames. It took a long time, but I spent the time just like looking at Twitter, Blender posts. I should not have a Twitter. It's not adding anything to my life. Anyways, we have 220 frames, and let me just show you what that is. So it's kind of like we've, again, just literally extracted out a window into this mirror, which will make it look like these tracker dots are stable, and that's kind of the beauty of this, and this is why it's so easy to remove in this fashion, because they don't move. But the mirror is moving because it's a mirror, and if you move the camera, the reflection. Either way. Now the goal is we're just going to remove these trackers, and then we're going to have another image sequence, basically like this without these dots, and then we send it back. So let's talk about how to do that now. What I could have done while waiting for those frames to render is open DaVinci, but I'm a big dum-dum, so we're just going to do it live. So the process I'm going to do for removal is, again, going to be in DaVinci. It's free, but you could also do it in Blender. You could do it wherever. So I'm just going to show you the general theory, as it were. Nothing to it but to wait. You're on my time, DaVinci. Not really. This is just embarrassing. Okay. Not upgrading. So once it's ready, take your image sequence. Make sure you don't have the first frame, which was just like a temporary. It was just to like make an output directory, so we don't need that. Take the image sequence, import it in. Make sure that it is the correct frame rate, or the same frame rate that you're going to export with. So I'm going to do 30 frames per second. If not, and I've made that mistake, you're going to get an image sequence that's slightly shorter or longer, and it's not going to line up. So I'm also making a timeline that is definitely 30 frames per second, same as the image sequence. But I'm also making it 1,000 by 1,000 custom resolution, same as our image sequence. Okay, so we just basically set up a project that's perfect for this, so you can just see, that's what it looks like. And the removal we can do inside of here. Technically, you could probably get away with it just doing it in the editing workspace, but Fusion makes it easier. So there's two ways to get rid of a dot. The first one is clone stamping. So like, for example, this dot, I could sample the texture above here and just kind of move it over. So like, paint, clone stamp, but on video. And that's going to work. It doesn't work for some of these, like I tried it on this one. So the other method is blurring out a tracker, which will actually look surprisingly good on a mirror. Why? Because there's already all these smudges, which are essentially just blurred out areas. So you could get away with anything, really. But let me show you how to do both. Not only because we need to for this shot, but because it'd be useful to learn both methods. So with the paint node, so we have the footage going to the paint. We want to paint out a dot, not only for a single frame, but for all the frames. So you're going to be tempted to go to clone multi-stroke, and you're going to be like, oh, I'm going to alt-click here to sample, and then, paint this out. And then you're like, oh, perfect. I can go here and paint this one out, and you go through all of them. But then you go to the next frame, and you can see that they come back. So you've actually only painted it out for a single frame, as you could see. That's what multi-stroke is. So that's not what you want to do. Instead, and it took me a while to learn this, you want to use stroke, not multi-stroke, but stroke. Set the mode to clone. So now everything we do is going to translate over to every single frame. And the process is the same. So I'm going to maybe make my brush a bit bigger. So let's do this on frame 1, just to keep things simple. So I'm just going to sample, alt-click, paint here. That wasn't a very good job. So I'm making sure this line on the door lines up, so it's directly under. So you can see we painted it out, but it's actually staying on all the frames. And it will look pretty good on average, especially if you don't know what to look for. So you just paint all of these out. And I would skip this, but I already have to do a bit of editing. And also, it emphasizes the point that there really isn't too much to this. It's just, you paint it, You move on with your life. You don't want to spend. Can you imagine like being a VFX artist? I mean, I know there's still like very manual labor-y jobs like rotoscoping and stuff like that. But can you imagine doing this like kind of effects on film? Like you need to dye it and make negatives and it's all a whole thing. I'm so glad we live in this time. So most of the dots are doing pretty good. One thing you're going to notice is there's going to be 3 more dots that emerge. Because again, if you remember from the footage, those were off screen until they go on screen. So let's also take care of those. You could, I don't need to save it. You could like do a second paint node that only takes care of these once they pop up, but I'm just going to have it paint over it for the entire time because I'm crazy. Who knows what this guy's going to do. Okay, so we got rid of all the dots except for this one, and you're asking, I mean, you already know that this one's going to mess up because I told you so, but let me actually show you what that looks like. So I'm going to paint over this dot, and you're going to notice as we play through the footage, you can see it's sampling this wood here, which the other areas don't have this issue because it's, very one color. But here you can really tell, like, doesn't really work. Wouldn't recommend it. So let's get rid of that whole paint thing. I want to get rid of it. Oh, I think I undid a bit too much. There we go. So you can see that this one's problematic. So this is where the second technique that I was talking about, blurring, comes into play. So let's blur. You can, blur the footage. We only want to do it in a certain area. So I'm going to make an elliptical mask. Put it here. Make it tiny. Make it tiny. So tiny. Tiny little... Either way. And again, because this thing's stabilized, we don't need to animate the position. Everything's easy. So we just keep this right here. We'll always hover over this. Take the blur, make it big, and again, it's on a mirror, so it's going to look fine. And then let's also take the mask and soften the edge. And we could even blur it way more than that to really get rid of it. So for most of the shot, it's just going to look like a smudge. If you don't want it to look so obvious, just like there's this circle, which again, nobody's going to notice, but let's say you have an issue with that. What I would recommend is you add in a second mask. You're like, why? We don't need it. Just draw a random shape around the circle as if there was a real smudge. And now that area is going to be blurred too. You soften it, and now the smudge is going to look much more natural, I'd imagine. I don't know. Believe me, it looks fine, especially when you reproject it, because this is what I did on the original. I am thinking, though, maybe I want to make this ellipse a little bit bigger. Something like that. Okay, so we've done the paint removal and also blur removal. So like there's smudges here, smudges here. Just believe me, it's fine. We've done the removal. Let's export this out and reproject it, which will effectively have removed the dots. So I'm going to the render tab. Now this is the definition of living life dangerously. I haven't saved it all. And we've done the effects, and now we're exporting. So we better hope nothing goes wrong. So I'm going to call this output dubake. So this is the output, the modified version. And we're going to call this clean bake, and it's going to be an image sequence. You could render this as a video, but I like image sequences when I'm not too lazy. So TIFF sequence is fine, 1000 by 1000, 30 frames per second, blah, blah, blah. In the file, I like it so that there's only 4 numbers. So it's like 0001 and then 2 and 3, not 8 digits. Like that's a lot. You'd have a long shot if you used all 8 digits. How many would that be? I don't know. You have to take 10 to the power of 8 and divide it by 30 for the number of seconds. Either way, 4 digits, started at 1, and let's see what we get. So just render it all. Shouldn't take too long because it's just a paint and a blur, essentially. And if we go to the desktop, once it's done, yes, you can see we have a new folder called Output the Bake, and it's, again, essentially the same thing. It's an image sequence, but this time with the trackers either removed or blurred or whatever, which means now we just take this and we reproject it. Well, what does that look like? What it looks like is we don't even need windowed coordinates anymore. We just replace this with this new thing, and let me just search it. This is a cursed image, by the way. Output the bake, select them all, 220 frames, cyclic, auto refresh. And you can see, and this is something we can do in Eevee, why not? you can see now these are perfectly removed. And when we render this from the perspective of the camera and slap it on top, it'll look fine. Again, there is this extension issue where it's out of bounds, but since the camera can only see what the camera sees, what am I trying to do? Camera, viewport display, pass or part out. It's not going to be an issue. Okay? And if you're thinking, oh, why is this brighter than the background? It's just because the background's at half transparency. So that's how you remove it. Now, one other point that I haven't stressed yet. So, okay, we've done the removal and the tutorial, fine. One thing I haven't stressed is, again, this does not need windowed coordinates anymore because we've baked out an image sequence that uses UV coordinates. If I just were to add a coordinate system back, you can see UV coordinates, that's like what it's using by default. The important thing is now this is not dependent on the camera point of view, right? I can actually look around, unlike before when it was at windowed coordinates. And what this means, the glitching is a EV thing, by the way. But what this means is now I can actually do distortions on this. So if I was to like subdivide and take this and, you know, do something like that, I mean, minus the weird shape key stuff going on, you can see the texture actually sticks on. I think the weird thing is that we're doing this shape key thing. But either way, you can see the texture actually distorts with it. This is important because we're literally going to be doing some dynamic paint stuff that distorts it and stuff like that, and we'd like it to be able to move. But no big deal. Either way, that's the end of the tutorial. I don't know why I'm spending an eternity on this. And I wish somebody would fix this bug. I guess I should report it. I don't like it when you pause, like Eevee then catches up or sometimes glitches, as you can see. But whatever. Are we at 30 frames per second? Yeah. Okay. So we've removed the trackers, and it will look fine whenever you don't pause it. And that's just what it is. So in the next part, we're going to be doing the bulk of the actual effect, the dynamic paint, the weird texture coordinate thing that I mentioned on the 90-second video. We'll talk about why we need to do that, and just the whole effect. A lot of render layer stuff too. So I hope, wow, I go full screen right at the end. What a pro move. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and I'll see you at part 3. Thank you for being a patron, and that's all there is to it.